Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video, and this is a video response. I was going to do a Friday drivey. I was feeling like, I haven't done one of those for a while, but as I mentioned the last time I did one, really only going to do a Friday drivey when I have something to say. I haven't really had much to say lately because I've been on vacation. Luckily, somebody else who's kind of picking up the torch while Mainmeister's not available is Wee Bob. Talked about him before. Actually, on one of my Friday driveys. He had a very interesting question he just posted a few days ago, and I thought, I'm going to do a video response. I haven't done one of these in a while, and it's a good question. And it's sort of, since I just posted my Chun-li video, wanted to mention, I forgot to, Wee Bob was actually, he does a lot of art, and he was actually doing a picture of Kristen Kruk, who played Chun-li in the film, the most recent of the Street Fighter films. He sort of took an image of her and he was trying to make it do something, so then he ended up turning her into the girl from Cyberpunk 2077. And so the title, I think, was something like Chun-li turns into Cyberpunk 2077. And I just thought, that's because I just talked about Chun-li, and because of Wee Bob, let's do a video response to Wee Bob. So this is what this is. Now, his question was talking about, could you live off the grid? Could you manage without all of the infrastructure that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis already? I think, generally speaking, I'd like to try, but I don't think I could. Now, interestingly, okay, for me, growing up as a kid in the 80s, there were things that I only dreamed could be possible. They were in the realm of science fiction, the vast majority of them, and I just thought, this is never going to happen, it's never going to be real, etc. Or I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons to kind of vent that or channel that need to do imaginative, fantastical things. And I've really been very happy that in recent years, a lot of that is becoming available, and it's so difficult to not embrace it wholeheartedly. And I'm not just talking the retro video game stuff. For example, with PlayStation VR, which I've talked about a lot, I got this after thinking a lot about it for about a year. And I have to say, what this thing delivers is incredible. With this, as a kid growing up watching, say, for example, the original Star Trek, I can play Star Trek Bridge Crew on this thing. And I can actually, because it's one of the options in the game, I can sit on the bridge of the Enterprise from the 1960s. And it's all around me, and it feels amazing. I can almost smell the incandescent light bulbs in all the panels. Incredible. And I've talked about before, Star Wars Battlefront has that X-Wing mission where I can walk around an X-Wing or I can get inside an X-Wing. PlayStation VR delivers to me something I just didn't ever think was ever going to be attainable. And if I was to ever live off the grid, I'd have to give all that up. I'm not saying I wouldn't ever, and that's part of what this video response is about. Another thing that I have actually reviewed, and again it kind of harkens back to that as a kid enjoying science fiction ideas of the 60s and 70s, I never thought I would ever get a HAL 9000. I've got one now. And this couldn't exist without that infrastructure, without that grid. This is the Iris 9000, which is Siri backwards, by the way, because it connects with your phone through Siri, and it talks to you. I ask this thing regularly, what's the weather going to be like, or various other questions, how do we convert 4 cups into liters, that kind of thing. It's there for me, and it answers my questions. And it's a HAL, like it in form and in function, it's a HAL 9000. And if I could have told myself as a kid this would even be remotely possible, I would have thought, you're crazy. How can a little box know everything in the world? This does. And this is tied in with that modern life that we have. Could I give that up? Now, in Wee Bob's question, he doesn't really say this is a permanent thing So I'm going to assume it is. Like, this is a one-way ticket. He mentioned, for example, that when he was a kid, he used to love the idea of living in a lighthouse. And I think I've read books when I was a kid of, you know, the life in a lighthouse off in some remote shore. And I remember thinking, yeah, that sounds really, really appealing. I would almost go for that. But I think you have to pardon all the noise outside. I've got the window open because it's rather warm. So, whatever. You might hear some clanging about. I think that sounds really appealing. The idea of like disconnecting yourself from all of this stuff and being in a remote life and just relaxing and just being. But I don't know that the reality would be that great. And for me to have to give up stuff like this is hard. I think one day I might. And I'll get to that at the end of this video. So, would I try it? Okay, definitely I'd give it a whirl. My wife is actually very interested in, there's a movement in various parts of the world called the tiny house movement, where people have decided, okay, it's getting impossible to own a home nowadays for a lot of people, so they're thinking outside the box. They're like, well, why do I need a house, which is basically a giant pile of stuff with a lid on it? Thank you, George Carlin. Why not rethink the idea and have a little house that's like, you know, the size of a wagon and take it places and that kind of stuff. And I watch these videos with her and I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think I would certainly try it, but it would mean being disconnected from the grid, which powers all this stuff that I think is so awesome. So I don't know that I could, but whatever. I mentioned, just came back from vacation. We actually went up into the interior of British Columbia, visit some friends, and there were a few times we were driving through some valleys and up on some high mountain areas that were completely empty. I mean, there was one stretch, we were in a valley that had maybe 3 houses in 100 miles? I don't know. In a long stretch, there were not too many people around. And we had kind of, as we were driving through, we were thinking, man, what would that be like to live in one of these houses? Nobody around except for your neighbor that you can see way over there on the horizon. That sounds awesome. The peace and tranquility. And I think that's sort of what wee Bob was getting at. Wouldn't that be great? And then I thought, yeah, but I'm not getting any younger. And there's probably going to be times when medical issues are going to come up. Things are going to break down. I'm going to need, you know, a little monitoring here and there and everywhere. Maybe the occasional specialist. And if I'm living in this valley and the nearest town is hundreds of miles away, like a good, how long? I don't know what the distance was, but let's say a couple hours away to the nearest like settlement. I don't think that's going to go well. So, and here's a factor that is very, very particular with British Columbia. Wee Bob is from Scotland. Maybe this doesn't apply there. But our province does have large stretches of wilderness with grizzly bears and cougars and wolves. I'm not saying it's like a jungle out there where they're all like around every corner and you're going to be attacked. It's nothing like that. But if you're living out in some remote area, all it takes is one. And the longer you're out there, you're probably going to encounter just one of those at some point in your life. And that's why we as a species decided, hey, let's all stick together in little communities so that we can kind of protect each other from those things out there. Now, I've been to Scotland. Maybe things are much easier there. You do have those like big, scary, woolly cows with the huge big horns. That's kind of a frightening looking thing. And the Loch Ness Monster. But more seriously, living off the grid, I guess it depends where you're living off the grid. Some of the folks, Neil Morris, we live in Australia. I'm sure living out there in the wilderness is a little bit dicey in that particular part of the world. I've heard like the spiders in that country can kill you, so I don't know about living off too far away from my fellow human being. Might not be great. I don't know. Again, it sounds very appealing, but I don't know. Now, I wanted to conclude this by again bringing up that tiny house movement. There was something very interesting that was mentioned on one video my wife was watching. I think it was out of Spain. They were talking about how this tiny house movement, this one model of tiny house that they were going around and doing a tour of, was a very popular one in this region of Spain among the elderly. And I thought, well, that's an odd demographic. Why particularly that? And the person said something interesting. It was all translated to English with subtitles. But I thought it was very interesting. The fella said, we sell a lot of these to the elderly because our experience has been, when you get to a certain age, you don't want stuff around you anymore. You're done. You've finished with all of this material junk, which is, I mean, I love you, Hal. But, all of these things that have us connected and interconnected with each other, you get to a certain point in your life, I'm not there yet, but you do get to a certain point in your life where it's like, it's just stuff. That was in Red Dwarf, wasn't it? That crash landed on the planet. He has to burn the guitar. Swifto will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, yeah, it's just stuff. Like, you don't need it. So I'm thinking, while right now, at this point in my life, the idea of living off the grid sounds interesting. I don't want to give up these awesome things, so no, not for me. Yet. I am wondering if there's going to come a point in my life where I don't want or need all of this surrounding me, and I might happily walk away from it all. I don't know. It was a very interesting question. I thought it was worthy of a video response, and hey, Wee Bob did an awesome picture of Chun-li, so he gets a video response. Well, I'll post Wee Bob's video again down below. I thought it was a nice little Friday discussion, and since I was lacking in that department, this one I'm going to reply to. And until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole.